heat of Afghanistan's helmet plains, where the line
Keep
between
pace,
life
no
and death is
stopping!
measured in heartbeats, a figure emerged
They're coming!
from the
We
dust
have to
cloud
move
of
now!
an IED explosion.
Gear up!
Blood
Let's go!
streaming down her face, uniform torn and blackened. She didn't cry out for help or collapse to the ground. Instead, she did something that would forever change how an elite Navy SEAL team viewed courage, sacrifice, and what it truly means to serve. What happened in those next few minutes would become legendary among Special Operations Forces, whispered in briefing rooms and retold in mess halls across military bases worldwide. Because sometimes the most extraordinary heroes come in forms you never expect, and sometimes the greatest acts of valor happen when no one is watching, except for those whose lives hang in the balance. This is that story. The true story of how one moment of selfless action by an injured woman in uniform would shock even the most hardened warriors and remind them why they fight. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Chapman when Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez received the call that would alter the course of her military career forever. As a combat medic with the 82nd Airborne Division, she had seen her share of dangerous missions, but nothing could have prepared her for what lay ahead in the remote valleys of Afghanistan. Rodriguez had enlisted 8 years earlier, driven by a desire to serve her country and make a difference in the world. Growing up in a small Texas town, she was the daughter of a Vietnam veteran who taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. Her father's stories of brotherhood forged in battle and the sacred duty to never leave a fallen comrade behind had shaped her understanding of what it meant to wear the uniform. The briefing room at FOB Chapman buzzed with tension as officers outlined the mission parameters. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for numerous IED attacks against coalition forces, was hiding in a compound approximately 15 kilometers northeast of their position. What made this mission particularly challenging was the terrain, a narrow valley surrounded by steep ridgelines that provided perfect vantage points for enemy ambushes. The operation would involve multiple units working in coordination. A Navy SEAL Team 6 unit, call sign Trident, would conduct the primary assault on the compound, while Rodriguez's medical team would establish a casualty collection point halfway between the target and the base. Her job was to provide immediate medical support for any wounded personnel and coordinate medical evacuations if necessary. Team leader, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, briefed the SEAL team with his characteristic calm intensity. At 34, Morrison had led countless operations across 3 deployments, earning respect not just for his tactical brilliance but for his unwavering commitment to bringing every man home. His team consisted of 6 operators, each a specialist in their field weapons, explosives, communications, and reconnaissance. As the helicopters lifted off in the pre-dawn darkness, Rodriguez felt the familiar mixture of adrenaline and focused calm that came before dangerous missions. She reviewed her medical protocols one final time, checking her equipment and running through trauma procedures in her mind. Her medical bag contained everything needed to stabilize critical injuries: tourniquets, hemostatic agents, airway management tools, and enough morphine to ease the suffering of wounded warriors. The flight took them over terrain that looked like the surface of an alien planet. Rocky outcroppings, deep ravines, and sparse vegetation that offered little concealment. Through her night vision goggles, Rodriguez could see the SEAL team's helicopter flying parallel to theirs, the operators inside preparing for what promised to be a challenging mission. The landing zone was a flat area of desert scrub approximately 2 kilometers from the target compound. As Rodriguez's team established their casualty collection point, they could hear the distant sounds of the SEAL team moving into position. The plan called for a swift, silent approach to the compound. With the assault beginning at 040 hours, Morrison and his team had spent weeks studying satellite imagery of the target area. The compound consisted of several buildings surrounded by high walls, with multiple entry and exit points that needed to be secured simultaneously. Intelligence suggested that besides the high-value target, there could be anywhere from 5 to 15 enemy fighters in the area. As the SEAL team approached the compound, they moved with the silent precision that had made them legendary. Each operator knew his role perfectly: who would breach which door, who would provide overwatch, who would secure the perimeter. Their years of training and combat experience had created an almost telepathic level of coordination. Rodriguez monitored the radio communications from her position, listening to the calm, professional voices of the operators as they reported their movements. Trident 1 in position. Trident 2 ready for breach. Trident 3, overwatch established. The familiar cadence of military communications provided a sense of order in what she knew would soon become chaos. At exactly 0400 hours, the assault began. The SEALs breached the compound walls simultaneously from 3 directions, using explosive charges to create entry points while maintaining the element of surprise. The sound of gunfire erupted across the valley as the enemy fighters responded to the assault. From her position, Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes in the distance and hear the distinctive sounds of different weapons. The rapid fire of M4 carbines used by the SEALs, the slower rate of AK-47s favored by Taliban fighters. The radio chatter became more intense as the team reported enemy positions and coordinated their movements through the compound. Multiple tangos in the main building, Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. Heavy resistance from the second floor. Moving to secure the HVT. The firefight continued for nearly 20 minutes, with the SEALs methodically clearing each building while under constant fire from enemy positions. Rodriguez found herself gripping her medical bag tighter, knowing that at any moment she might receive a call for medical assistance. Then came the call she had been dreading. Casualty! Casualty! Trident 4 is down. Need immediate medical assistance. Without hesitation, Rodriguez grabbed her medical bag and started moving toward the compound, accompanied by 2 soldiers providing security. The sound of gunfire was getting louder as they approached the target area, and she could see smoke rising from several buildings within the compound walls. As they reached the outer perimeter, Morrison's voice came over the radio again. Medical team, be advised we've secured the HVT, but we're taking heavy fire from the ridgeline. Enemy reinforcements have arrived and we're pinned down in the main building. Rodriguez assessed the situation quickly. The wounded SEAL was inside the compound, but the area was still under fire from enemy positions on the surrounding hills. Getting to him would mean crossing approximately 100 meters of open ground while under direct fire from multiple enemy positions. The security team with her looked nervous. These weren't special operations soldiers, they were regular infantry troops who had volunteered to provide security for the medical team. The prospect of crossing that open ground under fire was terrifying for anyone, regardless of their training. Staff Sergeant, this is too dangerous, one of the soldiers said. We need to wait for air support to suppress those enemy positions before we can move. Rodriguez looked at the compound, then at her watch. She knew that in battlefield medicine, time was everything. The golden hour, the critical 60-minute window in which proper medical treatment could mean the difference between life and death, was already ticking away. Every minute they waited was a minute that the wounded SEAL was bleeding, possibly dying. She thought about her father's words about never leaving a fallen comrade behind. She thought about the oath she had taken as a medic to preserve life and ease suffering. Most importantly, she thought about the wounded warrior inside that compound who was counting on her to do her job, regardless of the danger. I'm going in, she said, adjusting her body armor and checking her weapon. The soldiers with her exchanged glances. Staff Sergeant, we can't let you go alone. If you're going, we're going with you. Rodriguez felt a surge of pride in her fellow soldiers. This was what military service was all about. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things because it was the right thing to do, because their brothers and sisters in arms depended on them. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would use smoke grenades to create concealment, then sprint across the open ground to the compound wall. Once there, they would have to find a way inside while still under fire from the enemy positions on the hills. As they prepared to move, Rodriguez heard Morrison's voice on the radio again. All stations, this is Trident Leader. We've got Trident 4 stabilized, but he needs immediate medical attention. Medical team, what's your status? Medical team moving to your location now, Rodriguez responded, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. She pulled the pin on a smoke grenade and threw it toward the compound. Within seconds, thick white smoke began billowing across the area, providing the concealment they needed. Taking a deep breath, Rodriguez stood up and began running toward the compound, her medical bag bouncing against her back as bullets whistled overhead. The 100-meter sprint felt like it took forever. The sound of gunfire was deafening, and Rodriguez could see puffs of dirt kicking up around her feet as enemy bullets struck the ground nearby. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her focus remained clear. Get to the wounded SEAL, assess his injuries, and provide the medical care he needed to survive. Behind her, the 2 security soldiers followed, firing their weapons at the enemy positions to provide covering fire. Their courage in following her into that deadly open ground exemplified the spirit of military service that Rodriguez had come to admire during her years in uniform. As they reached the compound wall, Rodriguez could hear the intense firefight continuing inside. The SEALs were still engaged with enemy forces, and the sound of explosions suggested that grenades were being used by both sides. She knew that getting inside the compound would be just as dangerous as the sprint across the open ground. Finding a breach in the wall created by the SEALs' explosive charges, Rodriguez and her security team entered the compound. The scene inside was one of controlled chaos. SEALs moving from position to position, engaging enemy fighters while trying to secure the area around their wounded teammate. Morrison appeared from behind a concrete barrier, his uniform dirty and torn from the firefight. "Medical team, thank God you're here. Trident 4 is in the main building. Second room on the left. He took shrapnel from an IED and he's lost a lot of blood." Rodriguez nodded and moved toward the building, staying low to avoid the sporadic gunfire still coming from enemy positions. As she entered the building, she could hear the labored breathing of the wounded SEAL before she could see him. Petty Officer First Class Michael Chen lay on the floor of what had once been someone's living room, his face pale from blood loss. A SEAL medic had already applied a tourniquet to his left leg, where shrapnel from an improvised explosive device had severed his femoral artery. But Rodriguez could see immediately that Chen had multiple injuries, shrapnel wounds in his abdomen and chest that needed immediate attention. "How long has he been like this?" she asked the SEAL medic as she knelt beside Chen and began her assessment. "About 15 minutes. I've got the leg bleeding controlled, but I think he's got internal injuries. He keeps going in and out of consciousness." Rodriguez worked quickly and efficiently, her training taking over as she assessed Chen's injuries and began providing treatment. She started an IV line to replace lost fluids, administered pain medication, and began treating his wounds systematically. Despite the gunfire continuing around them, she maintained her focus entirely on her patient. Chen's eyes fluttered open as she worked on him. "Doc, am I going to make it?" Rodriguez looked into his eyes with the same confidence she had learned from her father. "You're going to be fine, sailor. Just stay with me and let me do my job." As she continued working on Chen, Morrison appeared in the doorway. "Doc, we've got a problem. Enemy reinforcements are surrounding the compound. We're going to have to fight our way out, and we can't carry Chen the way he is now." Rodriguez looked at Chen, then at Morrison. She knew what the SEAL leader was thinking. In their current situation, moving a critically wounded man would be extremely difficult and dangerous. But she also knew that leaving him behind was not an option any of them would accept. "Give me 5 more minutes to stabilize him, then we can move," she said. Morrison nodded.
"You've got it, Doc."
5 minutes. As Rodriguez continued working on Chen, she could hear the sound of gunfire intensifying around the compound. The enemy forces were closing in, and soon the SEALs would have to fight their way out of an increasingly dangerous situation. But she blocked out everything except her patient, knowing that the next few minutes could determine whether Chen lived or died. The sound of an explosion somewhere in the compound shook dust from the ceiling, but Rodriguez's hands remained steady as she worked to save a warrior's life. Outside, she could hear Morrison coordinating his team's defense of their position, but her focus remained entirely on the wounded SEAL who depended on her skills and determination. Time seemed to slow down as Rodriguez worked in that bullet-scarred room, with the sounds of battle raging around her. She knew that this was what she had trained for, what she had joined the military to do, to be there when her fellow service members needed her most, regardless of the danger to herself. As she finished stabilizing Chen's most critical injuries, Rodriguez reflected on the strange turn her military career had taken. She had joined the army to serve her country, but she was now treating a Navy SEAL in a Taliban compound while under fire from enemy forces. Military service, she realized, often took you to places and situations you never could have imagined. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. She, a woman in a combat zone, was providing life-saving medical care to one of the military's most elite warriors. In a few years, when people debated women's roles in combat, they might point to moments like this as evidence of what women could accomplish in the most dangerous situations. The explosion that changed everything happened without warning. Rodriguez had just finished inserting a chest tube to treat Chen's pneumothorax when the entire building shook violently. Concrete dust rained from the ceiling as the sound of the blast echoed through the compound. Through the broken windows, she could see a massive fireball rising from what had been their planned extraction point. "Damn it!" Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "They just hit our LZ with an RPG.
The helicopters can't land there now."
Rodriguez continued working on Chen, but her mind was racing. If their extraction helicopters couldn't land at the designated site, They would have to find another way out of the compound. With enemy forces surrounding their position and reinforcements arriving, their situation was becoming increasingly desperate. The SEAL team's communications specialist, Petty Officer Second Class David Martinez, appeared in the doorway. His face was blackened with smoke and his left shoulder showed blood seeping through his uniform. "Doc, Morrison wants to know how long before we can move Chen." Rodriguez assessed her patient's condition. The chest tube was draining properly. His blood pressure had stabilized with the IV fluids, and she had managed to control the bleeding from his abdominal wounds. Chen was still unconscious, but his vital signs were improving. "He's stable enough to move, but we'll need a stretcher." "He can't walk on that leg," Martinez nodded. "We'll improvise something. The boss wants to move in 10 minutes. Enemy forces are massing for an assault on our position." As Martinez disappeared back into the compound, Rodriguez heard the distinctive whine of incoming mortar rounds. She threw herself over Chen's body as the explosions walked across the compound, each blast getting closer to their building. Debris crashed through the windows as the Taliban forces began their assault in earnest. Chen's eyes opened during the barrage. Despite his injuries and pain medication, the sound of combat had brought him back to consciousness. What's happening?" "We're in a bit of trouble," Rodriguez said, maintaining her calm bedside manner despite the chaos around them. "But your team is getting us out of here." Chen tried to sit up, but Rodriguez gently pushed him back down. "Our team? Are they okay?" "They're fine. They're all fighting to get you home." Rodriguez checked his bandages as another explosion shook the building. "Just stay still and let us do our jobs." Morrison appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Doc, we've got bad news. The Taliban have set up a blocking position between us and the secondary LZ. We're going to have to fight our way through approximately 200 enemy fighters to reach the extraction point." Rodriguez felt her stomach drop. 200 Taliban fighters against 6 SEALs, 2 security soldiers, and herself. Odds that would challenge even the most elite military unit. She looked at Chen, knowing that carrying a wounded man through that kind of firefight would be nearly impossible. "What about air support?" she asked. "ETA 15 minutes for close air support, but we don't have 15 minutes. They're preparing to overrun our position." Morrison looked at Chen, then back at Rodriguez. "Doc, I have to ask, can he fight?" Rodriguez understood what Morrison was really asking. If Chen could handle a weapon, even from a prone position, it would add one more gun to their defense. But as a medic, she was trained to protect her patients, not put them in additional danger. Chen answered before she could respond. "Give me a rifle. I can shoot." Rodriguez started to object, but Morrison was already handing Chen an M4 carbine. "Just provide covering fire from this position. Don't try to move." The sound of gunfire was getting closer as the Taliban forces began their final assault. Rodriguez could hear the SEALs calling out target positions and coordinating their defense, but she knew they were vastly outnumbered. He checked her own weapon, a 9mm pistol that seemed inadequate for the fight ahead. "Doc," Morrison said, "we're going to have to move soon, whether Chen is ready or not. Can you keep him alive during a running firefight?" Rodriguez thought about her training, her experience treating casualties under fire, and the promise she had made to bring every wounded warrior home. "I'll keep him alive," she said with a conviction that surprised even her. "Good. Here's the plan. We're going to move as a team toward the secondary LZ, approximately 800 meters north of here. The enemy has blocking positions along our route, so we'll have to fight through them. Doc, you stay with Chen at all times. The rest of us will provide security." As Morrison briefed the team on their escape route, Rodriguez prepared Chen for what would be the most dangerous movement of his life. She gave him additional pain medication, secured all his bandages, and made sure his IV line was protected. She also grabbed extra medical supplies, knowing that other members of the team might be wounded during their breakout attempt. The improvised stretcher that the SEALs had constructed from wood and tactical gear looked sturdy enough, but Rodriguez worried about how Chen's injuries would handle the jarring movement of being carried across rough terrain while under fire. She had treated many combat casualties, but she had never had to maintain medical care for a patient during an active firefight. Chen gripped her hand as they prepared to move. "Doc, if something happens to me..." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Rodriguez interrupted. "We're all going home today." The first part of their movement went better than expected. Using smoke grenades and coordinated covering fire, The team managed to move approximately 200 meters from the compound without encountering significant resistance. Rodriguez ran alongside Chen's stretcher, monitoring his condition and adjusting his IV flow rate as needed. Then they hit the first Taliban blocking position. The enemy fighters had established themselves in a cluster of buildings that commanded the approaches to the secondary landing zone. As the SEAL team approached, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions, forcing them to take cover behind a low stone wall. "We've got at least 20 fighters in those buildings," reported the team's reconnaissance specialist, Chief Petty Officer Robert Kim. "They've got machine guns positioned to cover all approaches." Morrison studied the enemy position through his rifle scope. "We can't go around. They'll just reposition to block us. We have to go through them." Rodriguez found herself in a surreal situation, crouched behind a stone wall in Afghanistan, providing medical care to a wounded Navy SEAL while his teammates planned an assault on a Taliban position. 6 months earlier, she had been working in a field hospital, treating routine injuries and illnesses. Now she was in the middle of one of the most intense firefights of her career. The assault on the Taliban position was a masterpiece of small unit tactics. The SEALs used their training and experience to systematically eliminate the enemy fighters while minimizing their own exposure to hostile fire. Rodriguez watched in awe as they moved with a precision and coordination that she had never seen before. But the assault came at a cost. During the final push to clear the buildings, Chief Kim took a bullet through his left arm, and Martinez was hit by shrapnel from a grenade explosion. Suddenly, Rodriguez had 3 patients to treat while still under enemy fire. She worked quickly to treat Kim's gunshot wound, applying a pressure bandage and checking for nerve damage. The bullet had passed through the muscle without hitting bone or major blood vessels, a relatively minor wound by combat standards. Martinez's shrapnel wounds were more concerning, with multiple pieces of metal embedded in his back and shoulders. "Doc, how are my boys?" Morrison asked as he provided security while she worked. "Kim is fine, clean through and through. Martinez needs surgery to remove the shrapnel, but he can fight." Rodriguez finished bandaging Martinez's wounds.
Chen is still stable.
As they prepared to continue their movement toward the extraction point, Rodriguez realized that her role in the mission had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just treating casualties, she was helping to keep the entire team combat effective so they could fight their way to safety.
The second Taliban blocking position was even more formidable than the first. The enemy fighters had positioned themselves in a concrete building that provided excellent cover and fields of fire. They had also learned from the first engagement, positioning snipers on rooftops to target the SEAL team's movement. "This is going to be ugly," Morrison said as they studied the enemy position. "They've got us bracketed with machine guns and snipers." Rodriguez found herself thinking tactically for the first time in her military career. As a medic, she was trained to treat casualties, not to fight battles. But her experience treating combat wounds had given her insights into how battles were won and lost. "What about that building on the left?" she asked, pointing to a structure that appeared to offer a covered approach to the enemy position. Morrison looked where she was pointing. "It's possible, but we'd have to cross about 50 meters of open ground to reach it." "I could create a distraction," Rodriguez offered. "Draw their fire while you move to the flanking position." Morrison stared at her. "Doc, you're a medic, not an infantry soldier." "I'm a soldier first, medic second," Rodriguez replied. "And right now we need every advantage we can get." The plan they developed was dangerous but simple. Rodriguez would position herself where the Taliban fighters could see her and provide medical treatment to Chen in the open. The enemy fighters, seeing a female medic treating a wounded American soldier, would likely focus their fire on her position, allowing the SEALs to move to the flanking position unobserved. Chen protested the plan when he heard it. "Doc, you can't make yourself a target. That's not your job." "My job is to get you home alive," Rodriguez replied. "This is how I do that." As Rodriguez prepared to implement the plan, she thought about her father's words about courage. She had always thought courage meant charging into battle with guns blazing. Now she realized that sometimes courage meant making yourself vulnerable to protect others. The plan worked better than anyone had expected. As Rodriguez knelt in the open treating Chen's wounds, the Taliban fighters focused their fire on her position, just as predicted. But their bullets struck only dirt and rocks as she worked calmly under fire, protected by a slight depression in the ground that provided just enough cover. Meanwhile, the SEAL team moved undetected to their flanking position and launched their assault on the enemy position. The Taliban fighters, caught by surprise, were eliminated within minutes. But Rodriguez's relief was short-lived Chen had been hit by a stray bullet during the firefight. The bullet had struck Chen in his right shoulder, adding another wound to his growing collection of injuries. Rodriguez worked quickly to treat the new injury, while Martinez provided security. She could see that Chen was weakening from blood loss and the stress of combat, but his eyes remained alert and determined. "How much farther to the LZ?" she asked Morrison. "About 400 meters. We've got one more enemy position between us and extraction, but air support should be here soon." As if summoned by his words, the sound of jet engines filled the air. Two F-16 Fighting Falcons appeared overhead, their pilots in contact with Morrison to coordinate close air support for the final push to the landing zone. The airstrikes were devastating in their precision. The pilots used GPS-guided munitions to destroy the final Taliban position without endangering the SEAL team. Within minutes, the path to the extraction point was clear. But as they began their final movement, Rodriguez noticed that Chen's condition was deteriorating rapidly. His blood pressure was dropping despite the IV fluids, and his breathing was becoming labored. She suspected internal bleeding that her field treatment couldn't address. "We need to move faster," she told Morrison. "Chen needs surgery soon or we're going to lose him." Morrison grabbed the radio. "Dust off, this is Trident Leader. We need immediate medical evacuation at the secondary LZ. We have a Priority 1 casualty requiring immediate surgical intervention." The response crackled over the radio. "Trident Leader, dust off is inbound. ETA 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes felt like 3 hours as Rodriguez worked to keep Chen alive. She administered additional IV fluids, adjusted his pain medication, and monitored his vital signs constantly. Kim and Martinez, despite their own injuries, helped carry Chen's stretcher toward the landing zone. The sound of approaching helicopters was the most beautiful sound Rodriguez had ever heard. As the medical evacuation helicopter landed, she could see the flight medic and crew chief running toward them with a proper medical stretcher and advanced life support equipment. "What do we have, Doc?" the flight medic asked as they transferred Chen to the helicopter stretcher. Rodriguez gave a rapid medical briefing, describing Chen's injuries and the treatment she had provided. The flight medic nodded approvingly as she reviewed the medical care that had kept Chen alive during the firefight. As the helicopter lifted off with Chen aboard, Rodriguez felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She had done her job. She had kept a wounded warrior alive long enough to get him to definitive medical care. But she also knew that the mission wasn't over yet. The extraction helicopter for the remaining team members arrived minutes later. As Rodriguez climbed aboard, she looked back at the compound where the firefight had begun. Smoke was still rising from several buildings, and she could see Taliban fighters moving through the area, searching for any Americans who might have been left behind. Morrison sat beside her as the helicopter gained altitude. "Doc, I want you to know, what you did back there was extraordinary. You saved Chen's life, and you helped save all our lives." Rodriguez was too tired to respond with words. She just nodded, her mind already processing the events of the morning. She had done things she never thought she would do, made decisions she never expected to make, and discovered reserves of courage she didn't know she possessed. As the helicopter flew back toward Fob Chapman, Rodriguez thought about Chen and wondered if he would survive surgery. She thought about Kim and Martinez, who had fought despite their injuries. Most of all, she thought about the strange circumstances that had brought her to this moment. A female army medic treating Navy SEALs in a Taliban compound while under fire. The morning that had started as a routine mission had become something extraordinary. Rodriguez didn't know it yet, but her actions that day would become legendary among Special Operations Forces. A story told and retold in training courses and briefing rooms across the military. She had proven that heroism comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with rifles and grenades, but with medical skills and determination to never leave a fallen comrade behind. The helicopter ride back to Fob Chapman should have been a time for relief and recovery, but Rodriguez found herself unable to relax. Her mind kept replaying the events at the compound, analyzing every decision she had made, and wondering if she could have done something differently. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the firefight was wearing off, leaving her exhausted and emotionally drained. Morrison noticed her distress and moved to sit beside her. Over the noise of the helicopter rotors, he had to shout to be heard. "Doc, you did everything right back there. Chen is alive because of you." Rodriguez looked at Kim and Martinez, both of whom were receiving medical treatment from the helicopter's crew chief. Their wounds were serious but not life-threatening. and they would recover fully with proper medical care. She had managed to keep 3 wounded warriors alive and fighting during one of the most intense combat situations of her military career. I keep thinking about what could have gone wrong, Rodriguez shouted back. If Chen had died while I was treating him, if Kim or Martinez had been hit more seriously. Morrison placed a hand on her shoulder. That's combat, Doc. You can't control everything that happens. All you can control is how you respond. And you responded like a warrior. The word warrior struck Rodriguez as strange. She had never thought of herself as a warrior. She was a medic, a healer, someone who fixed the damage that warriors inflicted and sustained. But as she reflected on the morning's events, she began to understand that healing and fighting were not always separate activities. Sometimes saving lives required the same courage and determination as taking them. As FOB Chapman came into view, Rodriguez could see the controlled chaos of a forward operating base responding to casualties. Medical personnel were preparing to receive the wounded, while intelligence officers prepared to debrief the mission participants. The routine of military medicine was about to resume, but Rodriguez knew that something fundamental had changed in how she understood her role as a soldier. The landing at FOB Chapman was swift and professional. Kim and Martinez were immediately transported to the base medical facility for treatment, while Rodriguez was escorted to a debriefing room where she would spend the next several hours recounting every detail of the mission for intelligence analysis. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the base commander, was waiting in the debriefing room. A career officer with multiple combat deployments, Mitchell had risen through the ranks during a time when women's roles in combat were strictly limited. She looked at Rodriguez with a mixture of professional interest and personal pride. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I've been hearing remarkable reports about your actions this morning. Before we begin the formal debriefing, I want you to know that what you did out there reflects the highest traditions of military service. Rodriguez felt uncomfortable with the praise. In her mind, she had simply done her job, treated wounded soldiers, and tried to keep them alive. The fact that it happened during a firefight with Taliban forces didn't change the fundamental nature of her responsibilities. Ma'am, I was just doing what any medic would do. Chen needed medical care, so I provided it. Colonel Mitchell smiled. Staff Sergeant, most medics don't provide medical care while serving as bait for enemy fighters. Most medics don't help plan tactical movements while treating multiple casualties under fire. What you did was extraordinary, and the entire chain of command needs to understand exactly how it happened. The debriefing lasted 4 hours. Rodriguez recounted every detail she could remember, from the initial landing at the compound to the final extraction. Intelligence officers took notes and asked follow-up questions, trying to understand how a routine mission had evolved into such an intense firefight. What emerged from the debriefing was a picture of adaptability and courage under extreme pressure. Rodriguez had made quick decisions in life-and-death situations, improvised medical treatments with limited supplies, and contributed to tactical planning while maintaining her focus on patient care. Her actions had saved lives and contributed to the mission's success. As the debriefing concluded, Colonel Mitchell asked Rodriguez to remain behind. Staff Sergeant, I want to discuss your future with you. What happened this morning is going to generate a lot of attention, both within the military and potentially in the media. How do you feel about that? Rodriguez hadn't considered the possibility of media attention. She was a soldier doing her job, not a celebrity seeking recognition. Ma'am, I'd prefer to avoid any publicity. I don't want to be singled out when there were so many other people who contributed to the mission's success. I understand your feelings, but I'm not sure avoiding publicity will be possible. What you did this morning is going to be studied in military academies and medical schools. Your actions demonstrate something important about the capabilities of women in combat situations. The mention of women in combat made Rodriguez uncomfortable. She didn't want to be seen as representing all women in the military, or as proving or disproving any particular point about gender roles. She wanted to be evaluated as a soldier and a medic, not as a female soldier or a female medic. Ma'am, I hope my actions will be judged on their own merits, not as part of a larger debate about women's roles in the military. Colonel Mitchell nodded. That's exactly the right attitude, Staff Sergeant, but you should understand that whether you want it or not, you've become a symbol of something important. The question is how you want to handle that responsibility. After the debriefing, Rodriguez returned to her quarters, exhausted both physically and emotionally. Her roommate, Specialist Lisa Park, was waiting with questions about the morning's mission. Word had spread quickly through the base about the intense firefight and Rodriguez's role in treating casualties under fire. Maria, everyone's talking about what you did this morning. They're saying you saved a SEAL's life while enemy fighters were shooting at you. Rodriguez sat heavily on her bunk. Lisa, it wasn't like that. I was doing my job, treating wounded soldiers. The shooting was happening around us, but I was focused on my patients. Park looked skeptical. The guys from your security team are telling a different story. They say you deliberately exposed yourself to enemy fire to create a distraction for the SEAL team. Rodriguez realized that the story of the morning's events was already being embellished and mythologized. In the military's oral tradition, stories grew with each telling, and heroic actions became legendary exploits. She worried that the reality of what had happened would be lost in the mythology. That evening, Rodriguez visited the base medical facility to check on Kim and Martinez. Both men were recovering well from their injuries and were expected to return to duty within a few weeks. They were eager to talk about the morning's mission and Rodriguez's role in their survival. "Doc, I want you to know something," Kim said from his hospital bed. "I've been a SEAL for 12 years and I've worked with a lot of military medics. What you did this morning was beyond anything I've ever seen." Martinez nodded in agreement. "You didn't just treat our wounds, Doc. You helped us fight our way out of that compound. You made tactical suggestions that helped save all our lives." Rodriguez was touched by their gratitude but remained uncomfortable with their praise. "You would have done the same thing for me if our positions had been reversed." "Maybe," Kim replied. "But that's not the point. The point is that when we needed you, you were there. Not just as a medic, but as a warrior." There was that word again, warrior. Rodriguez was beginning to understand that her conception of herself as purely a healer was too narrow. In combat situations, healing and fighting were often the same activity, and medical personnel had to be prepared to do whatever was necessary to save lives. The next morning brought news about Chen's condition. He had undergone successful surgery at the larger medical facility in Kandahar and was expected to make a full recovery. The surgeons reported that Rodriguez's field treatment had been textbook perfect and had undoubtedly saved Chen's life. Morrison visited Rodriguez that afternoon with an official message from his command. "Doc, I wanted to deliver this personally. The Admiral wants to know if you'd be interested in cross-training with SEAL medical personnel. Your performance yesterday has generated a lot of interest in how we integrate different types of medical support into special operations missions." Rodriguez was intrigued by the possibility but also concerned about the implications. Cross-training with SEAL medical personnel would be an honor and a professional opportunity, but it would also mean more dangerous missions and greater publicity. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course, but I want you to know that everyone on the team would be honored to work with you again. You've earned our respect and our trust." As Morrison left, Rodriguez reflected on how much her life had changed in just 24 hours. The previous morning, she had been a routine military medic with a good reputation and solid skills. Now she was being offered opportunities that few medical personnel ever received, and her actions were being discussed at the highest levels of military command. The real shock came that afternoon when she received a visit from a Pentagon public affairs officer. Major Jennifer Walsh had flown to Afghanistan specifically to discuss Rodriguez's story and its potential impact on public perception of women in combat roles. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, your actions yesterday are exactly the kind of story the American people need to hear. You've demonstrated that women can perform at the highest levels in the most dangerous combat situations." Rodriguez felt overwhelmed by the attention her actions were receiving. "Ma'am, I understand the importance of public support for women in the military, but I'm not comfortable being used as a propaganda tool." Major Walsh looked sympathetic. "I understand your concerns, but you need to understand something important. Right now, there's a major debate in Congress about expanding combat roles for women. Your story provides concrete evidence that women can excel in these situations." "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Nothing dramatic. Just be willing to talk to journalists about your experience. Maybe participate in some public relations events when you return to the United States. Your story could help change policies that affect thousands of women in the military." Rodriguez asked for time to consider the request. She understood the importance of the debate about women's combat roles, but she was uncomfortable with the idea of becoming a public figure. She had joined the military to serve her country, not to advance social causes or political agendas. That evening, Rodriguez called her father in Texas. She needed perspective from someone who understood military service but wasn't caught up in the immediate aftermath of the mission. "Dad, I did something yesterday that's generating a lot of attention, and I'm not sure how to handle it." Her father listened patiently as she described the mission and its aftermath. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Maria, let me tell you something I learned in Vietnam. Sometimes you find yourself in situations where you have to choose between doing what's comfortable and doing what's right. It sounds like you chose to do what was right, regardless of the personal cost. But now they want me to become some kind of poster child for women in combat. That's not why I enlisted. No, it's not why you enlisted. But maybe it's why you were put in that situation yesterday. Sometimes we serve our country in ways we never expected. Rodriguez's father helped her understand that her actions had implications beyond her personal comfort. Whether she liked it or not, she had become a symbol of women's capabilities in combat, and she had a responsibility to handle that role thoughtfully. The conversation with her father helped Rodriguez begin to accept the broader implications of her actions. She realized that her story could indeed help other women in the military, and that refusing to discuss her experience might actually be a disservice to her fellow service members. The next day, Rodriguez agreed to participate in limited public relations activities, with the understanding that she would maintain her focus on her military duties. She would tell her story honestly and accurately, but she would not allow it to be sensationalized or distorted for political purposes. News of her decision spread quickly through Fob Chapman. Rodriguez found that her fellow soldiers' reactions were generally positive. They understood the importance of public support for military personnel and appreciated her willingness to represent them to civilian audiences. Morrison visited her again that afternoon with an update on the official investigation of the mission. Doc, the after-action report is complete, and I wanted you to see the conclusions before they go up the chain of command. Rodriguez read the report carefully. It described her actions in clinical, professional terms, but the conclusions were unmistakable. Her medical treatment had saved Chen's life, and her tactical contributions had helped save the entire team. The report recommended her for significant military recognition. What kind of recognition? Rodriguez asked. The Silver Star, for gallantry in action against an armed enemy. It's the third highest military decoration for valor. Rodriguez felt stunned. The Silver Star was awarded for exceptional heroism in combat, usually to soldiers who had performed extraordinary acts of courage under fire. She had never imagined that her actions as a medic would be considered worthy of such recognition. I don't know what to say. Morrison smiled. Say you'll accept it gracefully and continue to serve with the same dedication you showed yesterday. The military needs more soldiers like you, Doc. As Rodriguez prepared for sleep that night, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 2 days earlier, she had been an anonymous army medic serving in Afghanistan. Now she was about to become the recipient of one of the military's highest honors and a symbol of women's capabilities in combat. She thought about Chen, recovering from surgery in Kandahar, and about Kim and Martinez, who would soon return to duty with their SEAL team. She thought about the Taliban fighters they had faced, and about the complex moral landscape of warfare where healing and violence intersected in unexpected ways. Most of all, she thought about the responsibility that came with the recognition she was receiving. Her story would be told and retold, studied and analyzed, used to support arguments and policies she might not agree with, but she had decided to accept that responsibility because she understood that her individual actions had become part of something larger than herself. Rodriguez fell asleep that night knowing that her life had changed forever, but confident that she had chosen the right path forward. She would continue to serve as a soldier and a medic, but she would also serve as a symbol of what was possible when courage and skill were applied without regard for personal safety or comfort. 3 weeks after the mission that would change her life forever, Rodriguez found herself standing in the conference room at Bagram Airfield, facing a panel of senior military officers and Pentagon officials who had flown to Afghanistan specifically to interview her. The story of her actions during the SEAL rescue had reached the highest levels of military command, and now everyone wanted to understand exactly what had happened and what it meant for the future of women in combat roles. General Patricia Hayes, the first woman to command a combatant command, led the panel. Her presence at the interview emphasized the significance military leadership placed on Rodriguez's story. General Hayes had fought her own battles for recognition and advancement throughout her career, and she understood the weight that Rodriguez's actions carried in the ongoing debate about women's capabilities in combat. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, General Hayes began, "We're here because your actions 3 weeks ago have generated discussions at the highest levels of government about military policy and women's roles in combat. Before we discuss the broader implications, I want you to walk us through exactly what happened, in your own words." Rodriguez had told her story dozens of times over the past 3 weeks, but she knew this telling would be different. The officers in the room would analyze every detail, looking for lessons that could be applied to military training, policy, and operations around the world. She began with the initial mission briefing and walked through each phase of the operation, from the helicopter insertion to the final extraction. The officers listened intently, occasionally asking questions about her decision-making process or requesting clarification about medical procedures she had performed under fire. When Rodriguez described her decision to expose herself to enemy fire to create a distraction for the SEAL team's flanking movement, Colonel James Patterson, a veteran special operations officer, interrupted with a question. Staff Sergeant, at what point did you transition from thinking like a medic to thinking like a tactical infantry soldier? Rodriguez considered the question carefully. Sir, I don't think I ever stopped thinking like a medic. Everything I did was focused on keeping my patients alive and getting them to definitive medical care. The tactical decisions I made were simply part of providing medical care in a combat environment. General Hayes smiled. That's an interesting perspective, Staff Sergeant. You're saying that tactical thinking is inherent to combat medicine? Yes, ma'am. You can't separate medical care from the tactical situation when you're treating casualties under fire. Medical personnel have to understand the battlefield in order to provide effective care. The interview continued for 3 hours, with the officers exploring every aspect of Rodriguez's actions and their implications for military training and policy. What emerged was a picture of a soldier who had seamlessly integrated medical and tactical thinking in ways that challenged traditional assumptions about the roles of medical personnel in combat. After the formal interview, General Hayes asked Rodriguez to remain behind for a private conversation. The two women sat alone in the conference room as the general shared her own experiences as a pioneer in military service. Staff Sergeant, I want you to understand something that may not be obvious to you right now. What you did 3 weeks ago will be studied in military academies for decades to come. Your story will influence how we train medical personnel, how we integrate women into combat units, and how we think about the role of support personnel in special operations. Rodriguez felt the weight of that responsibility. Ma'am, I hope the focus will be on the lessons learned about combat medicine and not just on gender issues. It will be both, General Hayes replied honestly. Whether we like it or not, your story has become part of a larger conversation about women's capabilities in combat. The key is to ensure that conversation is based on facts and performance, not on stereotypes or political ideology. The general stood and walked to the window, looking out at the busy activity of Bagram Airfield. Staff Sergeant, I'm going to share something with you that's not widely known yet. Based on your performance and the recommendations from the SEAL team you supported, you're being considered for assignment to a Joint Special Operations Medical Unit. It would mean additional training, higher security clearances, and significantly more dangerous missions. Rodriguez felt her pulse quicken. Assignment to a Joint Special Operations Unit represented the pinnacle of military medical service, an opportunity that few personnel ever received, but it would also mean constant deployment to the most dangerous combat zones in the world. What would that assignment involve, ma'am? You would be cross-trained with special operations medics from all branches of service: SEALs, Delta Force, Air Force, Pararescue, Marine Raiders. You would deploy with these units on their most challenging missions, providing medical support in situations where conventional medical evacuation isn't possible. The offer was both thrilling and terrifying. Rodriguez understood that accepting such an assignment would fundamentally change her military career and her life. She would be operating at the very edge of military medicine, in situations where the difference between life and death was measured in seconds and inches. How long do I have to decide? She asked. Take your time. But understand that opportunities like this don't come along often, especially for medical personnel. After her conversation with General Hayes, Rodriguez walked across the base to the medical facility where she had been temporarily assigned while the investigation into her actions was completed. The routine work of treating routine injuries and illnesses felt strange after the intensity of her recent experience. Dr. Amanda Chen, the chief medical officer at Bagram, noticed Rodriguez's distracted demeanor during their evening briefing. Dr. Chen was no relation to the wounded SEAL, but the coincidence of names had created a bond between them as they discussed the medical aspects of Rodriguez's mission. Maria, you look like you have something on your mind. How did the interview go? Rodriguez described the meeting with General Hayes and the offer of assignment to the Special Operations Medical Unit. Dr. Chen listened thoughtfully, understanding both the professional opportunity and the personal challenges such an assignment would entail. What's your gut feeling about the offer? Chen asked. Part of me is excited by the challenge and the opportunity to work at the highest level of combat medicine. But part of me wonders if I'm being offered this assignment because of my performance or because I've become a symbol. Dr. Chen nodded. That's a fair concern, but I'll tell you something. I've read the after-action reports from your mission, and I've talked to the surgeons who treated the casualties you stabilized. Your medical performance was exceptional by any standard. You earned this opportunity through your skills and your courage. The validation from a senior medical officer helped Rodriguez feel more confident about her abilities, but she still struggled with the broader implications of accepting such a high-profile assignment. She knew that every mission she participated in would be scrutinized for evidence supporting or contradicting arguments about women in combat. That evening, Rodriguez received an encrypted email from Chen, the wounded SEAL. He had been transferred to Walter Reed Army Medical Center for rehabilitation and was expected to make a full recovery. His message was brief but heartfelt. Doc, I wanted you to know that I'm doing well and expect to return to full duty in 6 months. The doctors tell me that your field treatment saved my life and prevented permanent damage to my leg. I also wanted you to know that the entire team has been talking about your performance, and we all hope we get the chance to work with you again. You're a warrior, Doc, and we're honored to call you a teammate. Hoo-yah! The message from Chen reinforced Rodriguez's understanding of how her actions had affected the people she had served with. She realized that her decision about the special operations assignment wasn't just about her own career. It was about her continued service to the warriors who might need her skills in future missions. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Morrison had returned to Afghanistan for another mission and had made a point of stopping at Bagram to visit Rodriguez. He looked rested and confident, ready for whatever challenges his next assignment might bring. Doc, I heard about the offer from General Hayes. What are you thinking? Rodriguez described her mixed feelings about the assignment and her concerns about becoming a symbol rather than simply a soldier. Morrison listened carefully, understanding her dilemma from his own experience with high-profile military service. Let me tell you something about being a symbol, Morrison said. Every special operator becomes a symbol to some degree. We represent the military's elite capabilities, American values, and the sacrifice that military service requires. You can either embrace that responsibility or let it overwhelm you. How do you handle it? By focusing on the mission and the people you serve with. The symbolism takes care of itself if you continue to perform at the highest level and maintain your integrity. Morrison's perspective helped Rodriguez understand that accepting symbolic responsibility was part of advanced military service. Rather than avoiding that responsibility, she needed to embrace it and use it to serve her fellow service members and her country more effectively. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Major Walsh, the Pentagon Public Affairs officer who had visited Rodriguez at FOB Chapman. She brought news about the media response to Rodriguez's story and requests for interviews from major news organizations. Staff Sergeant, your story has generated enormous interest from the media and the public. We've received interview requests from CNN, Fox News, NBC, and several major newspapers. How would you like to handle these requests? Rodriguez had been dreading this moment. She understood the importance of public support for the military, but she was uncomfortable with the idea of becoming a media figure. She worried that media coverage would distort her story and turn her into a political symbol rather than a professional soldier. Ma'am, I'm willing to do interviews that focus on the realities of military medical service and the capabilities of our forces, but I don't want to participate in discussions about political policy or social issues. Major Walsh nodded. That's a reasonable position. We can structure the interviews to focus on your professional experience and the broader capabilities of military medical personnel. Morrison offered his own perspective on media relations. Doc, the key is to stay focused on the facts and avoid speculation about policy implications. Tell your story honestly and let other people draw their own conclusions. Over the following week, Rodriguez participated in several carefully structured media interviews. She found the experience less uncomfortable than she had expected, largely because the journalists focused on the technical aspects of her mission rather than the broader political implications. The interview with CNN's chief military correspondent was particularly effective. Rodriguez described the medical challenges of treating casualties under fire and the importance of integrating medical personnel into tactical planning. She emphasized the teamwork and professionalism of all the personnel involved in the mission, deflecting attention from her individual actions to the collective effort that had made the mission successful. The media coverage generated thousands of letters and emails from military families, medical students, and young women considering military service. Rodriguez was overwhelmed by the positive response and the stories of inspiration that people shared with her. One letter particularly moved her. It came from a teenage girl in Ohio whose brother had been killed in Afghanistan 2 years earlier. The girl wrote that Rodriguez's story had helped her understand that her brother had been supported by people who would risk everything to save wounded warriors, and that knowledge had helped her cope with her grief. Reading that letter, Rodriguez understood that her story had taken on a life of its own, touching people in ways she had never anticipated. She began to see her media appearances not as unwanted publicity, but as opportunities to honor the service and sacrifice of all military personnel. As her temporary assignment at Bagram neared its end, Rodriguez made her decision about the special operations assignment. She would accept the position, understanding that it represented both a professional opportunity and a responsibility to serve as a role model for other women in the military. Her decision was influenced by a conversation with Sergeant First Class Jennifer Martinez, a female Army Ranger who had served with distinction in multiple combat deployments. Martinez visited Bagram as part of a unit rotation and made a point of meeting Rodriguez. "Staff Sergeant, I want you to know that what you did has already opened doors for other women in the military. My unit commander told me that your performance has changed his perspective on integrating women into special operations support roles." Martinez's comment helped Rodriguez understand that her individual actions were contributing to broader changes in military culture and policy. By accepting the special operations assignment, she would continue to demonstrate women's capabilities in the most demanding military roles. The night before her departure from Bagram, Rodriguez sat in her quarters, reflecting on the remarkable turn her life had taken. A month earlier, she had been an anonymous Army medic with a solid reputation and good skills. Now, she was preparing for assignment to one of the military's most elite medical units, and her story had become part of national conversations about military service and women's roles in society. She thought about Chen, recovering in Washington and preparing to return to his SEAL team. She thought about Kim and Martinez, who had already returned to duty and were preparing for their next deployment. She thought about Morrison and his team, who continued to serve in the most dangerous missions around the world. Most importantly, she thought about the responsibility she had accepted to serve as both a skilled medical professional and a symbol of what was possible when dedication, training, and courage were applied without regard for traditional limitations. She understood that her future missions would be scrutinized and analyzed, that her performance would be seen as representative of all women in similar roles. But Rodriguez felt confident in her decision. She had proven to herself and to others that she could perform at the highest levels in the most dangerous situations. Now, she would have the opportunity to continue that service at an even more challenging level, supporting the military's most elite warriors in their most critical missions. As she prepared for sleep, Rodriguez received one final message that summarized the impact her story was having across the military. It came from General Hayes, who had returned to Washington but wanted to share news about policy changes that were being implemented based on Rodriguez's mission. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I wanted you to know that based on your performance and similar examples from other female service members, the Department of Defense is implementing new policies to expand combat roles for women. Your story has provided concrete evidence that women can excel in the most demanding military situations, and that evidence is driving policy changes that will benefit thousands of women who serve after you." Rodriguez understood that her individual act of courage and professionalism had become part of something much larger than herself. She had helped to change not just policies, but perceptions about what was possible in military service. The responsibility was significant, but so was the opportunity to continue serving her country at the highest level of her profession. 2 years after the mission that changed everything, Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez stood before the graduating class of the Army's Special Operations Medical Training Course, preparing to deliver the keynote address at their graduation ceremony. The faces looking back at her represented the future of military medicine, men and women from all branches of service who would soon deploy to the world's most dangerous combat zones as Special Operations medics. Rodriguez had spent those 2 years serving with Joint Special Operations Command, deploying on missions that pushed the boundaries of military medicine and human endurance. She had treated casualties in Syria, Somalia, Iraq, and Afghanistan, working alongside the military's most elite warriors in situations that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. The assignment had been everything General Hayes had promised: challenging, dangerous, and professionally rewarding. Rodriguez had expanded her medical skills far beyond what she had thought possible, learning advanced surgical techniques, trauma management, and emergency medicine that few medics outside the special operations community ever mastered. But perhaps more importantly, she had helped to establish new protocols and procedures for integrating medical personnel into special operations missions. Her experiences had been studied, analyzed, and incorporated into training programs across the military medical community. Looking at the graduating class, Rodriguez saw the future of military medicine, highly trained professionals who would serve in roles that hadn't existed when she first enlisted. Among the graduates were 12 women, a number that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez began, "you are about to embark on careers that will challenge everything you think you know about medicine, about military service, and about your own capabilities. You will treat injuries in places where conventional medical wisdom says treatment is impossible. You will make life and death decisions with incomplete information and limited resources. Most importantly, you will serve alongside warriors who will depend on your skills, your judgment, and your courage." Rodriguez's speech drew on her experiences over the past 2 years, but she focused particularly on the lessons learned during that first mission with the SEAL team. She described how the mission had taught her that healing and fighting were often the same activity, that medical personnel had to think tactically as well as medically, and that the most important qualification for a special operations medic was not technical knowledge, but the willingness to do whatever was necessary to save lives. "The mission I want to tell you about happened 2 years ago in Afghanistan," Rodriguez continued. "It was supposed to be a routine support mission, establish a casualty collection point, and wait for casualties that might never come. Instead, it became a lesson in how quickly situations can change and how important it is to be prepared for anything." She walked the graduates through the mission, emphasizing the decision points where she had to choose between safety and service, between following protocols and adapting to circumstances. She described the moment when she decided to cross that open ground under fire, not because she was fearless, but because a wounded warrior needed her help. "The most important thing I learned that day," Rodriguez said, "was that courage is not about not being afraid. Courage is about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. Every one of you will face moments when you have to choose between your own safety and the life of someone who is depending on you. In those moments, your training will guide your hands, but your heart will guide your decisions." After her speech, Rodriguez was approached by Second Lieutenant Sarah Kim, one of the female graduates who would soon deploy with a Marine Special Operations team. Kim represented the new generation of women entering special operations medical roles, and she wanted advice on how to handle the unique challenges she would face. "Ma'am, I've read about your mission in Afghanistan and I've studied the medical procedures you used, but I'm worried about how I'll be accepted by the special operations teams I'll be supporting. Do you have any advice?" Rodriguez smiled, remembering her own concerns before her first mission with the SEAL team. "Lieutenant, the only thing that matters to special operations personnel is whether you can do your job when it counts. They don't care about your gender, your background, or anything else except your competence and your commitment to the team. But what if I make a mistake? What if I'm not strong enough or fast enough? You will make mistakes. We all do. The key is to learn from them and not let them compromise patient care. As for being strong enough or fast enough, remember that your strength comes from your training and your determination, not just from your physical capabilities." Rodriguez's conversation with Lieutenant Kim reminded her of her own journey from uncertainty to confidence. 2 years of challenging missions had taught her that she belonged in the special operations medical community, not because she was exceptional, but because she was dedicated to excellence in serving others. Later that day, Rodriguez received a call that would change her life once again. Colonel Mitchell, now serving at the Pentagon, had news about a new assignment opportunity. "Maria, I have something I think you'll find interesting. The Army is establishing a new Special Operations Medical Training and Development Center, and they need an experienced Special Operations medic to help develop the curriculum and training protocols. The position would involve working with all branches of service to standardize Special Operations medical training. The assignment would mean leaving operational units and transitioning to an instructional and developmental role. Rodriguez would be helping to train the next generation of special operations medics while working to improve the medical support available to elite military units around the world." "What would my specific responsibilities be?" Rodriguez asked. "You would be developing training scenarios based on real-world missions, writing medical protocols for different types of special operations, and serving as a subject matter expert on integrating medical personnel into combat units. Essentially, you would be helping to institutionalize everything you've learned over the past few years. The opportunity was appealing, but Rodriguez worried about leaving operational service. She had found her identity as a special operations medic, and the idea of transitioning to a desk job, even one focused on training, felt like a step away from the work she loved. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. But I want you to understand something. This isn't just another assignment. This is an opportunity to influence special operations medicine for decades to come. The training programs you help develop will prepare thousands of medics who will save thousands of lives." That evening, Rodriguez called Chen, the SEAL she had treated during her first special operations mission. He had made a complete recovery and had returned to full operational status, serving as a team leader for SEAL Team 6. Their friendship had continued over the past 2 years, and Rodriguez valued his perspective on military service and career decisions. "Doc, congratulations on the speech today. I heard it was outstanding." Rodriguez described the assignment opportunity and her mixed feelings about transitioning away from operational service. Chen listened thoughtfully, understanding her dilemma from his own experience with career decisions. "Maria, let me ask you something. What's been the most rewarding part of your special operations service?" Rodriguez thought about the question. "The most rewarding part has been the feeling that I'm making a difference in the lives of people who are putting themselves at risk for something greater than themselves." "And how many people have you directly impacted through your medical care?" Rodriguez calculated quickly. "Maybe 50 or 60 casualties over 2 years of deployments. Now think about how many people you could impact by training the medics who will serve for the next 20 years. Think about the casualties who will be saved by medics you train, using protocols you develop, applying lessons you've learned." Chen's perspective helped Rodriguez understand that the training assignment represented a different kind of service, but potentially one with even greater impact than her operational work. By sharing her knowledge and experience with future special operations medics, she could multiply her contribution to military medicine. The decision became easier when Rodriguez received a letter from Lieutenant Kim, who had deployed to Africa just 2 weeks after graduation. Kim described her first mission, treating casualties from a helicopter crash in Somalia, and credited Rodriguez's advice with helping her maintain her composure during the crisis. "Ma'am," Kim wrote, "your speech gave me the confidence to do my job when it mattered most. I hope someday I can have the same kind of impact on future medics that you've had on me." Reading Kim's letter, Rodriguez realized that her influence on military medicine was already extending beyond her individual service. The training assignment would formalize and expand that influence, allowing her to shape special operations medical training for years to come. Rodriguez accepted the assignment and spent her final month of operational service completing a deployment to Iraq with a Delta Force unit. The mission reinforced her understanding of how much special operations medicine had evolved since her first deployment to Afghanistan. The integration of medical personnel into combat units had become seamless, and the capabilities of special operations medics had expanded far beyond traditional expectations. Her last operational mission involved treating casualties from an improvised explosive device that had damaged a convoy carrying humanitarian supplies to refugees. Working alongside Delta Force medics, Rodriguez helped save the lives of 3 local aid workers and 2 American soldiers, using techniques and procedures that had been developed based on lessons learned from missions like her first experience with the SEAL team. As she worked to stabilize the casualties, Rodriguez reflected on how her understanding of military medicine had evolved. She no longer saw herself as simply a medic who happened to serve in dangerous places. She understood herself as a warrior whose weapon was medical knowledge and whose mission was preserving life in the midst of conflict. The transition to her new assignment at Fort Bragg was both exciting and challenging. Rodriguez found herself working with senior medical officers and training specialists to develop comprehensive training programs that would prepare special operations medics for the full range of situations they might encounter. Her first major project involved developing a training scenario based on her original mission in Afghanistan. Working with Morrison, who had been assigned to the same center as a tactical instructor, Rodriguez created a realistic training exercise that challenged medical students to provide care under fire while contributing to tactical decision-making. "The key," Rodriguez explained to the training development team, "is to make the students understand that medical care and tactical thinking are inseparable in combat situations. They need to think like warriors as well as medics." The training scenario they developed became a cornerstone of special operations medical training, used by all branches of service to prepare medics for the realities of combat medicine. Rodriguez found deep satisfaction in watching young medics work through the same challenges she had faced. knowing that the lessons they learned would help them save lives in future conflicts. 6 months into her new assignment, Rodriguez received news that would provide closure to the chapter of her career that had begun in Afghanistan. Chen called with an update on his team's recent mission. "Doc, I wanted you to know that we had a situation last week that reminded me of our mission 2 years ago. We had a wounded teammate in a compound surrounded by enemy forces, and our medic had to treat him under fire while we fought our way out." "How did it go?" Rodriguez asked. "Perfectly. The medic used techniques he learned in the training program you helped develop. He saved our teammate's life and helped us with tactical planning, just like you did for us. Your influence is living on in a new generation of medics." Chen's call helped Rodriguez understand that her career had come full circle. The frightened medic who had crossed that open ground under fire in Afghanistan had become a master instructor whose influence was shaping military medicine across the armed forces. A year later, Rodriguez stood before another graduating class of Special Operations medics, but this time the audience was different. The class included medics from allied nations, British, Canadian, Australian, and German personnel who had come to the United States to learn the latest techniques in Special Operations medicine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez began, "military medicine is an international brotherhood and sisterhood united by our commitment to preserving life and serving those who serve their nations. The techniques you learn here will save lives not just in American units, but in military forces around the world." As Rodriguez looked at the faces in the audience, American soldiers and international allies, men and women from diverse backgrounds united by their commitment to military medical service, she reflected on the unexpected journey her career had taken. A single moment of courage in an Afghan compound had led to a career that was influencing military medicine on a global scale. After the ceremony, Rodriguez was approached by General Hayes, who had come to Fort Bragg to deliver closing remarks to the international class. The general, now nearing retirement after a distinguished career, wanted to discuss Rodriguez's future and the impact her story continued to have on women's military service. "Maria, I wanted you to know that the policies we changed based on your performance in Afghanistan have resulted in a 300% increase in women serving in special operations support roles. Your story opened doors that are still opening." Rodriguez felt proud of that legacy, but she also understood that her individual story was just one part of a broader transformation in military service. Women like General Hayes had fought the larger battles for recognition and opportunity. Rodriguez had simply provided one compelling example of what was possible when those opportunities were made available. "Ma'am, I hope my service has helped other women, but I also hope it's been evaluated on its own merits as professional military medical service." General Hayes smiled. "That's exactly the right attitude, and it's why your influence has been so positive. You've never asked for special treatment or recognition based on your gender. You've simply performed at the highest level and let your results speak for themselves." As General Hayes departed, Rodriguez thought about her father, who had passed away 6 months earlier after a long battle with cancer. He had lived to see his daughter receive the Silver Star and to watch her speech at the Special Operations Medical Training graduation. In his final days, he